This analysis will contain a major spoiler for the first 20 minutes of the game. If you have this game in your backlog, I strongly advise you play up until the point where you enter Talos 1's lobby. In 2017, Arcane Studios released Prey, the critically acclaimed reimagining of 2006's namesake. The game received largely positive reviews from critics and players alike, often citing the atmosphere and level of detail of setting a new high bar in the science fiction genre. If you know nothing about it, you are effectively trapped on a Talos 1 space station and trying to escape it, but there's been an infestation of alien life on board that can take the form of anything that the player can pick up and interact with. That's the most brief explanation I can give, without going into too much detail and making this video a lot longer than it needs to be. When talking about Prey with any critical analysis, it can be very easy to follow a tangent rabbit hole. The game is so expertly crafted on a technical level and from a design level that one can often find themselves talking about one specific part of the game only to end up discussing more intricate aspects to illustrate just how well made of a game it actually is. I want to try and discuss one small part of Prey, which I wish many other developers would include in their games, because I found that this was a clever bit of design and it made the game far more interesting and engaging on a level that is rare for games to operate. That being, the game invites the player to solve problems, not just from a standard gamey methodology, such as find a keycard or find the access code, but also by using their own ingenuity and creativity. Let's first talk about the type of game that Prey is. It's very easy to claim, oh, Prey is just another first-person shooter. But I would disagree with this. Yes, you do take the viewpoint of the first person, and yes, you do get guns to shoot things. But calling Prey a first-person shooter, for me at least, gives a similar feeling to as if you were to describe Skyrim or Alien Isolation as a first-person shooter. Yes, they're first-person, and yes, you do get projectile weaponry. But for some reason, it just feels wrong to classify them as that. With Prey especially, depending on how you play the game, I would imagine most people don't rely on firearms until somewhere between the first quarter and halfway through the game, mainly due to the scarcity of ammo and the type of enemies you do encounter early to mid-game. If the game seems to be a first-person shooter, why is it so engaging for the first half, when unless if the player plays in a very specific manner, they simply lack the tools to treat the game as they would a typical first-person shooter? Well, if you've not played the game yet, part of the way the game hooks you is through the enemies called mimics. In this game, mimics are small, spider-like creatures who scuttle around and leap at the player. They have a special party trick. They can transform themselves into any in-game object that the player can pick up. This means that every time a player enters a different room in the game, they could be walking into an ambush. A player learns very quickly upon entering the room to read it, to look for clues of anything out of place. For example, did this room always have 3 chairs in it? There's a dead guard on the ground. Why are there 2 guns by him when the guards only carry 1? Whilst this is a very engaging gameplay mechanic, it isn't the only gameplay mechanic that exists early in the game. But this mechanic is so subtle that most players don't even realise it's there, but it exists right at the start of the game and remains almost until the player has completely explored the entirety of the Talos 1 space station. And if you've played the game, you might not have even realised it's there yourself. But to anyone who has, I ask you this. Have you ever noticed that virtually every locked room in Talos 1 is basically a puzzle to get access to? Before I talk too much about how rooms in Prey are essentially puzzles to get into, I first need to talk about how Prey educates the player into understanding its rules. Good video games tend to teach the player their rules, or rudimentary mechanics early on. The best ones are able to do this seamlessly, without a hand-holding tutorial, and Prey is no exception to this. In fact, it takes educating of the player to another level, without the player even realising it in most circumstances. For example, when you start the game, you wake up in your apartment. In terms of interactivity, the player is given quite a bit in just this one room. If they want to, they can learn how to pick up objects, interact with a computer terminal, read books, and even pick up and throw objects around if they want to. And this is without a single voiceover or line of text. The player's curiosity is all that's required to figure out rudimentary mechanics which will be vital for figuring out the game and how to progress. After you leave the apartment, you board a helicopter and travel over a city to your job. It's here the game starts another tutorial, and most players who are experienced will be able to tell that this is a tutorial. But the game is very clever with how it presents it. It basically lets the player decide how to go about passing it. The player enters a series of rooms designed to test the player. The scientist at the end of the room gives them a task like hide or run to the other side of the room as fast as possible, and whilst it's possible in one of these tests to just simply stand there and do nothing, the others require some form of action from the player, meaning the player is forced to do something in order to perform the final action. Now, the catch is, no matter what the player does, the scientists react as if the player has failed the test or not gone about it the way the scientist thought they would do, even if they react uniquely and positively to what the player does. They're given the sense and the implication that the player was supposed to do something else. So what's the significance of this? If this is the first time that the player has played the game is teaching the player how to perform different basic actions in order to navigate and interact within the world by simply experimenting with the controller in these testing areas. But it isn't just basic movements and actions. The game presents the tests in a way that the player can experiment with how to pass them. For example, one of the tests requires the player to hide in a room. The only thing in this room is a chair. And when I first did this test, I crouched down in the corner of the room, and to my amazement, the scientist commented on doing that.
Morgan, we can see you there.
And the second time, I hid behind the chair, and the scientist commented on that as well.
Is he? He's hiding behind the chair.
Two different actions which resulted in a positive response from the game. Now, whilst the game presents the player's result as a failure in terms of the testing within the narrative...
I'm sorry, can someone please explain to me what's happening? Simmons?
The player can still see that by simply experimenting with the environment, they can get a response from the game which is a positive one. The player is in a sense rewarded for thinking outside of the most obvious action. And this carries forward into the full game, but it's cemented into the player's mindset shortly after the testing chamber sequence. I am now going to talk about a major spoiler for one of the best game reveals in recent years. If you have yet to play Prey and have it in your backlog, stop watching now and go and play it up until at least the Talos 1 lobby. When you wake up the next day, your apartment seems different. Some objects have moved, your computer terminal now has evacuation orders. Something is very wrong. And eventually, you see that the helicopter ride was staged, that things are not as they seem. The player has now learnt not to trust what their eyes and other senses are telling them, that the way forward is to experiment, that the path you see might not take you to your destination, and what appears to be a barrier can be broken. And this links to the overall theme of the game, but for now, let's just focus on this one lesson that the game teaches the player, that what seems like a barrier can be opened or broken. Shortly after you leave your apartment, the game throws a very interesting tutorial screen your way, and it's one of the few times early on that the game interrupts your experience with an instruction, and look at this screen carefully. Notice how it says, play your way, and gives you 2 possible options to open the locked door. But also notice how it mentions you can find multiple methods to overcome enemies and other challenges. The game is dropping a subliminal message to you here, that there are many ways to overcome obstacles in the game, and this reinforces the lessons taught to the player during both the testing tutorial sequence and the escape of the apartment. But now, they're actively encouraging you to look for alternatives, and the first major opportunity that the player has to do this comes shortly after they get to the Talos 1 lobby. When the player reaches this area, they're presented with a clear objective marker to get to, but there's just something about this area. It's a huge open area, the biggest they've encountered so far in the game. There are rooms all over the place, and for seasoned gamers, you just know there's going to be things inside them. Resources, weapons, health packs. You just know that behind those locked doors, there's something good, something that you want to get. And this is where the game designers do something amazing. They allow the player to solve a problem using their own initiative and creative thinking. Initially, the game told you to find the keycard, or find another way round. But upon entering the lobby of Talos 1, you pass an office, which is very tempting. You probably saw it when you entered this area yourself, and you probably even tried to get in. It's a large room, and there's a huge safe in the back, and there's a computer terminal near the door, and just something about this room invites you to break in. You walk up to it and you're told you don't have the key card, and it's likely you don't have the hacking skill to break the lock either. But the one thing you can see is on the back of the door is a door override button, and on the computer terminal there's a display which reads door locking override, lock and unlock. So think about it. You have a locked room which has multiple ways to open the door, but the computer terminal one doesn't make sense. Why place a computer terminal with a lock and unlock function if there is only one clear way in? It doesn't make any sense to do this. So, if you haven't played the game, let me ask you a question. Without the keycard, how do you open this door? Obviously, you spend time to find the correct access card, but given what the game has done so far to encourage you to think outside the box, is there another way? When I encountered this room, I thought back to what I'd learnt during the apartment escape. I tried to break the glass on the windows in order to get access to the room, and this worked, but I couldn't fit through the window itself. So I knew if I could just press the button on the computer screen, the door would open. So then I thought, can I throw something through the broken window, which will hit the button on the screen, and the door then should open? So scavenging the lobby, I found an ashtray and threw it around a little bit, and I discovered that even without upgrading anything, my character could throw this object quite far. So I took the ashtray, took it back to the room with the broken window, and threw it at the computer screen. It hit the button, and to my amazement, the door actually opened. This, for me, is where Prey stands out from a large quantity of first-person shooter games. The player is presented with a problem, and then they can use their own initiative and creativity to solve it. But what if you didn't think about throwing an object? Can you come up with other solutions? The answer is yes. Other solutions which you can do is there's a weapon in the game called the Boltcaster crossbow, which fires harmless foam darts. If you use this to hit the computer terminal or even the emergency release button on the back of the door will open again. And other people have used other methods to get access to this room. I've seen people upgrade the alien tech tree, which allows them to shrink down in size to fit through the broken windows. And someone found the simplest solution of all. If you break the glass right next to the computer screen, despite it looking too far away, your character is able to simply reach through the glass and press the switch manually. This kind of design isn't just limited to this one room. Virtually every locked room on Talos 1 has multiple methods to gain entry, and while some are restricted to more conventional gamey methods, like finding the keycard or finding the correct security code, others allow the player to use their own creative thinking based on the tools at their disposal, and in some instances, even referencing other science fiction media, they can also overcome a problem. For example, have you ever seen a film where the characters have to use an air vent or climb up to the pipes in the ceiling? Well, there are instances in Prey where you can do that, but these are not necessarily telegraphed to the player. They just exist seamlessly as part of the environment, and if the player happens to notice them and thinks, "Can I use that?" they'll probably be rewarded for doing so. And another instance of clever design which the player can solve using creative thinking. You know how in some science fiction or horror movies, when the characters arrived after the monster attacked, those who were there originally, you often see crude homemade barriers blocking the path. You kind of see it a lot in James Cameron's Aliens when the Marines first arrived. Well, Prey has those too. Talos 1 has a number of occasions where rooms are blocked due to heavy barricades. So how does the player get by? The game presents the player with a few obvious choices. The first is by using the upgrade system. The player can simply increase the amount of weight that they can lift up and move at one time. But in early game, this can take some time to upgrade, and in non-upgrade runs, this just isn't possible. A player can, however, use a recycler grenade, which basically destroys the object and converts it into resources. However, these grenades are a finite resource, and early to mid-game they are not easy to come by or to create, and there is also a risk of when you're using them, any good items on the other side of the barricade can get sucked into the recycle grenade and become destroyed, so there is a risk on using those. But there are some more clever ways to get through this barricade. Talos 1 has a number of pressurised gas canisters around the environment, and typically players will use these as traps, but if you carry them to a barricade and shoot them, they will explode with enough force to shift the barricade, allowing you access. This is a solution which a player can exploit very early in the game, and profit from doing so. So why is this good design? Aside from the fact it provides the player with a lot of freedom with problem solving, they're not just looking for keycards or access codes, but they can use all kinds of creative thinking to get through a locked door. The onus is on themselves to try and come up with creative solutions within the rules that the game has put down for them. And the effect this has is that every time a player enters a new area, aside from the tension of the mystery from the threat of the aliens and the unknown, there's a sense of mystery and challenge presented from trying to access these locked rooms. The player knows there must be a way inside. It's just a matter of finding its secret. A little bit like a puzzle box. There's always a sense of accomplishment. You feel like you've outsmarted someone. And in Prey, the player is given this challenge and feeling a satisfaction every time they enter a new area and attempt to open the locked door. But the game never holds the player's hand or outright explains or show the player that you can do this, that you can solve these problems by using these methods which are outside of the conventional video game way of doing things. Design and education of the player is done so subtly and so cleverly that the player realises early on what tools they have and how they can apply them within the rules of the game to their own creative thinking in order to get rewards. And when you combine this with the tension and the atmosphere of a science fiction game set against the backdrop of an alien invasion, it's quite a unique and wonderful experience. And I encourage you, if you have not yet played this game, do yourself a favour after this video, go and check it out. It's really cheap now, and it is a wonderful experience that I recommend anyone should try. That's all I really wanted to talk about on this. It was just this one little part of the game which gave me so much pleasure when playing, but there's tons more to this game, so please give it a go. It's a lot of fun, and I think you'll be surprised at how creative you can be in the wonderful world of Prey as you explore the mysteries of Talos 1. See you next time.
And now it's time to beat the mind game.
Hey guys, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, as well as the bell notification button. If you like my video and would like to continue the adventures, please follow me on Twitter or Instagram. Links to both are in the description below. Or, if you'd like to support me and my channel further, back me on Patreon, or buy me a coffee. Links to both can be found below. Even the smallest donation is a huge help to keep this channel going. Thank you.